How's it going, y'all? Justin Ibarra here with Colorado Adventure Guides. Thanks for joining our CalTopo tour planning demo. This could be beneficial for folks who are looking for a refresher, or if you're just starting to dive into learning how to tour plan and utilizing some of the features and functionality on CalTopo. So we're going to keep it basic today. You'll notice some of the topics that we are going to go ahead and cover. First off, we're going to teach you all how to log in, how to save maps. We're going to go ahead and discuss and understanding and use of the different map layers that you'll find on CalTopo. Then we'll start talking about the use and understanding different overlays, map overlays you can utilize on the CalTopo function. We're also going to discuss how to use map objects and understand the use of those, which is going to include utilizing markers, lines, and polygons for our tour planning. And then we'll wrap up the session here with overview of how to share our maps with our friends, how we can print it, and then also to download our maps so that we can use them while we are out into the field. So let's go ahead and jump over to CalTopo and get started. So you should be able to see CalTopo here on the screen. Simply just go to caltopo.com and you're going to see a screen that might look similar to this. So if you haven't already, you're going to want to go ahead up on that upper right-hand corner, hit that sign up button, and you can go ahead and utilize whatever email login you want to use. You can also choose the level of subscription that you want to use. There's from free and there's other services. You can notice here on my screen already that some of these functions and features are only available on the Pro version. So you'll be able to choose what works best for you. And then once you get all signed up, you're going to go ahead and log in. As you can see, there's a few different avenues to utilize here. So I do use Google personally. So I'll go ahead and log in here with Google. And this is where all your maps are going to be saved. So every map that you work on or you share or you get shared to you, you'll be able to access it from this login. So we'll go ahead and let this pop up. And now you're going to see that I am into my personal CalTopo account here. So I'm going to click this little arrow just to maximize that screen here a little bit. So that's how you get logged in. Next thing, we want to understand that there's a couple different ways that we can go to the zone that we're planning on touring. One of them, if you are familiar with the map itself, you can just scroll and find that zone. You're also going to notice on the upper part of the screen here, there is a search box. So if you have coordinates or you have just a general idea of where you're going to be touring, you can plug that in there. So let's go ahead and plan a tour at Loveland Pass. So as you see, it just drove me right to the top of Loveland Pass here. So I'm going to click a couple of those layers off. So now I see myself here at Loveland Pass. We can go over base layers here now. Some of this is going to be personal preference, and there's some benefits to each of these. So the first thing you're going to see is that we're on the Forest Service layer. So the Forest Service layer, you're going to see, of course, our topographic lines. You're going to see some green vegetation here. You'll notice roads, existing trails, trailhead locations. The Forest Service layer is a useful tool in that sense. Another commonly used layer is going to be a map builder topo or hybrid. And so if we click that, you can notice that we get a little bit more an idea of our vegetation here. It's still going to show us our topo line so we can identify terrain shape and then also existing roads, trails, water features, and such. So one that I commonly like to use is going to be an aerial imagery or satellite. So here you'll see aerial imagery, global imagery, NAIP. Those are both good. Google layers here, satellite. I prefer to use that one just because we get a little bit more detail here. So as you can see with that satellite imagery, we get a lot more detail in the vegetation here. You can also stack these layers. So you notice I just clicked that stack button. And if I wanted to pull out one or the other, let's imagine a satellite and the map builder hybrid, I can use this little scale here and I can pull one out over the other. So that can be a beneficial tool there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this on satellite. When I do use satellite, I guess we're now hopping down to the map overlays. I do like to click that contours button because again, with the contour lines, you'll get a pretty good idea of terrain shape. And then with the satellite imagery, you'll get some good detail towards vegetation clues. Sometimes reading topographic lines can be a little bit tricky, so just a quick review on there. They're basically going to be the lines of elevation. The closer these lines are together, the steeper the terrain. The further apart that they are, that's going to identify more gentle terrain. And then a couple other things to discuss here. You're going to notice we start to see some V's on our map. And so when we see these uphill style V's, that's going to be indicative of a drainage or a valley feature. So we can see right here, we see vegetation clear, that's clear, but we also see these topo lines that indicate to us that is going to be a drainage there. And then just the opposite, you'll see some downhill pointing V's, and I'll pop up here to the ridge here a little bit. These downhill facing V's are going to identify a ridge line or a spur. And then we notice that there's some circles. That's typically going to indicate the high point of that ridge. And then a ridge line is basically going to be connecting a high point to a high point where we start to see these contour lines coming together. So that would identify a ridge line and a potential saddle, which is the low point between two high points. So there's just a quick and dirty for understanding topo lines here. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this back out here. Some of the other useful overlays that I like to use, if I'm using satellite, sometimes I will click this map builder overlay, and you can notice there that some stuff started to pop up there. It'll help to identify existing roads, existing trails, some water features, and also some peak names. So that's a pretty useful overlay. The next overlay we'll talk about is super beneficial for us as backcountry skiers, snowboarders, snowmobiles, snowshoers, ice climbers, is the slope angle shading tool. So we did talk about the topo lines and identifying the closer together they are, the steeper, the further apart they are, the more gentle the slope. This tool right here, we click it and you're going to notice a lot of color just popped up. So this is a great tool to start with our tour planning to identify different angles in the terrain that we might be traveling into. And so you'll see a scale down here at the bottom here. As we notice that there's some areas that aren't shaded at all, that would identify to us that is under 27 degrees in slope angle. A light yellow is 27 to 29. Orange is 30 to 31. Dark orange 32 to 34. Red's 35 to 45. Purple 46 to 50. Blue 51 to 59. And 60 plus is going to be black, 60-degree plus. So this is a great tool to start to identify slope angles, and again, especially when we're traveling in the winter in the backcountry. Keep in mind, we don't want to use this as our end-all be-all. We do want to verify once we get in the field what slope angles we might be on, because these models here, even though they have been getting better, there might be a smaller piece of terrain that doesn't register here that you would be able to potentially encounter while in the field. So that's our slope angle shading. There's some other layers in here, ones that I would commonly use. Cell coverage down here at the bottom. This is going to be pretty beneficial to understanding if you are inside or outside of cell coverage, and if you maybe need to bring a satellite device with you. And you can see there's the major carriers there for a drop down. Another cool tool here is sun exposure. And so you can identify where the sun is going to be hitting today or different times of the month and throughout the different times on a given day. So pretty beneficial, especially when we start to understand how sun can affect our snowpack. So that's sun exposure. There's some other cool stuff on here. Wind plot. This can identify where the wind is coming from and the speed. If you're not familiar with your local avalanche forecasting center, you can click this avalanche overlay and it will identify what zone you're in from an avalanche standpoint. Other useful tools, zoom back in here. Is weather stations. So you can get some real-time data from some weather stations. Looks like there's a couple around here. You can click on these blue dots and get an idea of what is going on weather-wise. And then beyond that, there are some other tools in here, but those are the ones that you commonly are going to be utilizing as a backcountry tour. And so we covered base layers, we covered overlays. Now let's start to develop a tour plan. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out a little bit here. We're going to tour plan for the Loveland Pass area. Now, of course, your tour for the day should really be dictated who you're going with, what your goals and objectives for the day, what's the weather, what's the avalanche hazard, and then you can pick and choose where you're going to go from there. But you might find yourself tour planning just in your downtime, start to identifying different areas that you can pick and choose from based on all those factors. on any given day that you're looking to go out. So as far as adding objects, one way you can do it is you can click on this little plus icon here, and we notice that this drop down did show up here, where you have markers, lines, polygons, and another variety of things you can utilize. Another way you can do it is if you find a certain point and you right click on it, you can do the same thing by adding objects. Let's go ahead and add a marker for where we're going to be parking. So you can label this, you can comment whatever you want there. I pick the style, you can notice that a lot of different icons come up. You can utilize whatever you prefer. I typically like to use this P here for parking, and you can color it whatever you want. I like to color my parking black. And there we go. We just put our first object onto our map. Now you're going to notice that this save as screen came up. And so we do want to save this map. So let's call this a CalTopo demo Loveland Pass. So you can reference it for future use. You can download it for use in the field, and you can share this map with your friends. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So we went ahead and named it. You can choose to keep it private, or no one else can access it. You can choose to make secret, or you need to have a special access code, URL. Anybody who has this URL can access it, or you can public, so anybody would be able to find it. So let's go ahead and just keep it as a URL for now. I'm going to click save. And now anything that I do to my map, it's going to go ahead and auto save. So that's how you're going to save maps, and we'll talk about how to share maps here at the end of the session. So we just added a marker point. I think it's important to note here that you can get some pretty cool information. Get that out of the way by just clicking on that object. Now we see this pops up here. You can get sun exposure of that object. You can get UTM coordinates, and you can get some additional information such as the elevation of that point, slope, and the aspect as well. So pretty cool, useful information there. So I have my parking area. Now I want to start to develop my tour. And let's say I already looked around the zone and I want to maybe try and poke around in the alpine zone to get some alpine skiing in, or at least have the option to do so on a given day. So I want to develop an idea of where I can move up into that terrain. This is a reason why I do like the satellite imagery, because you can identify clearings in the trees. Now, anytime we're going uphill, we want to try and find the easiest way to go up. So that's going to be slope angle and potential vegetation in mind. So now I can hop over here, this little orange plus button, or you can right click in the area you want to start, and I'm going to go ahead and add a line. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start from the other side of the road here at the parking lot, and I like the clearings in the trees. Typically a little bit easier to tour up. And so as I zoom in here, I can see that there is clearing in these trees. I'm not seeing it being too steep at all. Couple little pockets of steeper terrain. But to me, it looks like this could be manageable. Now, keep in mind, this is just going to be a track on the map. Once we get into the field, we might deviate a little bit off of this track as well. Zoom out here a little bit. Okay, so now I'm in the above tree line area. And I'm just trying to find the easier, more gentle slopes on my way up. Zoom out here a little bit more. I'm going to try and follow this little rib here up. And again, I can notice it's a ridge or rib because I'm starting to see that downhill V on the topo lines. To me, it looks like this could be a good access point to get up to the top of the ridge. Cool. So that gives me a pretty decent up track there all the way to the ridge if I wanted to make it all the way up there. Now you can change the style of this line if you want. I like to have little arrows pointing uphill, and you can color it whatever you want, but I like to mark my up tracks as green. I'm just going to call that up track and hit OK. Now, if I zoom out, you can see my up track from the parking lot all the way up to that ridge point. Another cool thing we can do is, and I think it is important for our tour planning, is to mark decision or check-in points on our route. And so by looking at this terrain here, we're in the trees for half of the way. Right around here, we start getting above that tree line where we should be able to get a pretty good idea and view of the terrain around us. So I want to mark a decision point on here. And so one way that I like to do this is I'm going to hover my mouse over where it shows the highlight of the trail. I'm going to right click on that. I'm going to go ahead and add a marker. And again, we can style it with whatever we want. Let's go ahead and put a little pin there. And let's call this a check-in decision point. Let's put it through. Cool. So now we have a decision point here. Once we broke tree line, we can get an understanding again of what the terrain is looking like above us here. Maybe we're not feeling it. We want to maybe just stay in the near tree line and below, or maybe it's looking okay and we feel like we can go ahead and continue on to access this ridge. Now, keep in mind, this is just, again, a decision point on the map. There could be multiple decision points and check-in points, and there should be really that you're making throughout the day. But for me on this tour plan, I want to go ahead and mark that because it's definitely a spot where I want to see what's going on above me. So similar to clicking on the marker, I can click on this uphill track as it highlights, and you can get some pretty cool terrain information. So as you see right here, we get a good profile. We can see right on that line where I put that marker for a decision point. We can identify the distance of that uphill track, where we're starting, where we're finishing elevation-wise, so our total elevation gain and or loss. And then down here, we have some cool graphs looking again at our elevation, min, max, average, how much we're gaining. We can look to the slope angle here, where we have a minimum, average, and max slope angle. We can identify the average aspect that we're on and the vegetation cover. So super beneficial information to help us in our tour planning stages of the day. Another cool thing is the travel time. This is based off of the Munter time scale, so we can start to identify how long might it take us to get up to the top of this ridge if we're hiking, if we're off trail, or we're skiing. And this is a good tool to use. There's other avenues you can utilize as well as far as how long it might take you to go uphill. I've seen this go one way or another, but it is a good starting point. Another thing you can utilize is most people in the winter are traveling about 1.5 to 2 miles an hour. That can vary depending upon if you're on a Forest Service road where it's packed in or if you're breaking trail. And then for every 1,000 foot in elevation you gain, you typically add about an hour to that tour plan. So that's another way to help develop a time frame as well. Okay, so we got our parking area. We talked about a line for an up track. We have a decision point. Now, I think we're all here to ski, so we want to start to identify different areas that we might utilize as a down track. And so things I keep in mind, again, are going to be slope angle here, terrain shape, vegetation. So next we'll talk about how to use a polygon. And this is just one way to utilize your tour planning here. So as I look to here and think of gaining this ridge right here, I can see some area where it's really a little bit more simple terrain. It's not as steep. This area does have some pockets of some steeper terrain. Zoom out and we can see on this ridge here, there's definitely some steeper terrain. All right, and let's go ahead and start by putting a polygon around the steeper stuff. And I'm just clicking through this. Okay, it's made you take it all the way up there, up to the ridge. All right, so I created my polygon. Now let's imagine that we're going out and we really wanted to stay off steeper slopes, and we can identify that this is going to be steeper, more exposed slopes off that ridge there. And so let's go ahead and just close that terrain. So now we're starting to get into identifying how to open and close terrain before we go into the field. So I'm just going to go ahead and click close. I like to utilize red as closed in my tour planning. So just as you see there, I have a polygon. and I mark that as closed. So we never want to reopen terrain that we closed before we went into the terrain. And that helps us to not get fooled by getting in there, seeing a bunch of tracks here. We don't see tracks there, and we can go into fall into a heuristic trap where we go and ski this terrain. We closed this for a reason. We decided we didn't want to go ski steeper terrain today, so we are not going to open that once we go into the field. So let's go ahead and step down here. It looks like this could be another cool little zone that we might be able to check out. So I'm going to go to add polygon. And this one is not going to be as steep. We're looking more in the upper 20s with a couple of pockets into the potential mid 30s. And that's going to follow that ridge line up. And I maybe want to utilize that as a potential option for the day. So let's just call that option 1. And you can, again, utilize different colors to open or close terrain. Since this does have a little bit of steeper terrain, we're starting to get into higher 20s, low 30s, low to mid 30s. What I like to do sometimes is put an orange. So an orange to me would be a zone that we'll open or close once we get into the field. Again, if we closed it, we wouldn't reopen it once we get in there. But by keeping it as an orange to me, if we got to this point right here and we see, yeah, it looks like there is a little bit of some recent activity or there's some wind slab in there, we can decide to close that terrain while we're in the field. Or the opposite, it's looking good, there's not a whole lot of wind, and there's other observations that we make that maybe make us feel comfortable with skiing this terrain, we can go ahead and open it and ski it. So let's go ahead and throw one more polygon on there. And we'll go up this ridge here a little bit. And we're going to utilize this pocket here. And as we can see from a slope angle shading, it's going to be a little bit more simple terrain. We're not really seeing much color in there. And let's go ahead and give that option 2. We're going to go ahead and keep that one green. We've identified that, yeah, it's really not a whole lot of exposure there. While there is a little bit of color, should be pretty simple to navigate through that terrain. So that's an example of utilizing polygons and also understanding how we can open, close, or conditional terrain during our tour planning session. And then similar with the markers and the lines, we can also click on that polygon, click on terrain statistics, and you get a really good idea of what we're looking at elevation-wise, slope angle-wise, aspect-wise, and tree cover. Super beneficial information there. So as you can see in that option 2, it's a max of 32, average 19 degrees, and more in that simple terrain. Option 2, it pumps up a little bit, and then as we come over here to the red closed zone, yeah, we can see we're getting into a lot more above 30 degrees slope angle. Okay, so we have our parking area, we have our up track, we have identified some potential open, close runs, conditional runs for the day. We're looking pretty good there. We have some options. We have a least exposed alternate route to get out of there. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how we get down from these zones. So again, I like to utilize vegetational clues, and it really just depends upon your comfortability to skiing in trees. But we can notice that there are some clearings in the trees to help us get down. We should be able to at least ski back down the way we came up. It should have been the easier way up. But let's say either one of these zones, we should end up in the same general area. Let's go ahead and add a couple of options for a down track. One option here is, again, we could ski down the way we came up, but if we wanted to ski something different, looking towards the clearings and the trees, and that would bring us right back. Let's call this down track. And let's give another option here. Let's say we ended up skiing down over here. And we'll call that another down track option. Cool. Now we have a couple options for our down track as well. So once you're feeling pretty good about your tour plan, And we talked about some markers or up tracks, decision points, different options, and then down tracks. I'm feeling pretty good about it. This is again automatically going to be saved onto your account. And so while you're in the field, you get the CalTopo app, you log in with that same username and password, and you're basically going to open up and go to your data, and you should see this saved map in there. If you're going to be going into an area where it doesn't maybe have cell service, there is the option to download those layers, and that way it downloads it in a higher resolution format. And it isn't a geospatial offline mapping tool, so you can track yourself all throughout the day, and you'll be blue dotted through the terrain you're going to be going into. Other things you can do here is hit this little print button. This is how you would manually print this on paper. And we notice this big red box showed up. And so you can change it from portrait to landscape, whatever is going to work best for the terrain you're going into. And you can extend or make that box a little bit smaller. We do want to make sure it's encompassing the whole area we might be touring in for that day. There's a lot of different other settings you can utilize there as well. Then you would hit generate PDF. The computer will do its thing. And then here momentarily we'll see a PDF of that map that we then can print off and take with us in the field if we prefer. You'll also notice, and there's going to be a QR code. So that is one way that you can share that map via a QR code to your friends or touring partners. So there is our PDF map, scale, and there's a QR option there. So that's one way to print and one way to share it. Let's hop on back here. Another way you can share it, we're going to click on this little eye icon here. You can share it with this URL. And then you can also create some additional access. So create the shareable link. So read would basically mean they can look at it, but they can't do any changing on it. There's a couple different options here. Update is that they can read everything that you have put on there and they can create new objects. And then write would give them full access. So they can delete, edit, and add new objects to that map. So let's say we wanted to just give them an update access. We'll hit OK. Then we would share this URL with them, or we can click that QR code and share the QR code with them that way. So that's how we're going to be able to share our map with our friends. We can work across the world together at the same time, and we can print our maps as well. So that's the majority of the things we wanted to cover in this session. There are a lot of other useful tools you can utilize in here. One more thing, if you are not super familiar with reading topo lines, this is a new feature that just recently came out, is this 3D button. And you do need a pro account to access this, but this is really cool because you can identify in a 3D vantage point what the terrain is looking like, kind of like utilizing Google Earth. Some things might change on your tour plan once you identify it in a 3D view if you weren't familiar with reading topo lines. But that 3D functionality is super cool feature you can utilize. So click that back out. And that is going to be a wrap on our just kind of basic tour planning session here for CalTopo. Again, I would highly encourage you hop on here, play around on your own time, but hopefully this is going to at least be a good refresher for you or help to give you an idea of where to start in the process of developing our tour plans before we're out in the field. Good luck, stay safe, ski pal.